Yeah, hi, good afternoon everybody. Well, it was an interesting budget this afternoon. It was apparently a budget for working people. As always, there were winners and losers. Just starting with personal tax and pay, it was interesting. Probably the rabbit out of the hat was the announcement on the national living wage, which is going to go up to £7.20 next April, rising to £9 in 2020. So that will probably be the headline grabber of the budget. Some news on the personal allowance, that will rise to £11,000 next April, and the rate at which the high rate of tax kicks in will be at £43,000 next April. In terms of the state of the nation, there was some good news in terms of growth. The growth for 2014 was uplifted to 3%. The forecast for growth this year was reduced from 2.4% to 2.3%, but there was positive news for growth for the rest of the years in the Parliament. In terms of the budget deficit, we're anticipating that the budget deficit will go in 2019-20, at which point we'll be in surplus. So a bit of aspiration there for the budget. In terms of the cuts in the budget, it was announced there'd be about £20 million worth of cuts in efficiency and £12 million of cuts in welfare. So they were the big headline grabber in terms of cuts. In terms of welfare, some real sort of rather nasty news for those on benefits and welfare. Freezes across the board for many benefits, and also some benefits going for a lot of people. In particular, child tax credit for the third child in a family, that will go, I think, from next April onwards. So not great news for those on lower income or indeed with families. Something that probably wasn't actually announced but was in the detail was a restriction on the amount that individuals can pay into a pension each year, restricted to £10,000, down from £40,000. That will affect a number of business owners. Funny enough, very little airtime on alcohol, gambling, tobacco and fuel in the budget. Absolutely no mention of alcohol, tobacco and the fuel, so we can assume there's no change there. Some good news in fuel duty, that will remain unchanged. And some very interesting announcements on vehicle excise duty. The Chancellor acknowledged that with the advent of low emission cars, there's really been a reduction in the amount of money that the government generates from vehicle excise duty. So what he says, I think from a couple of years' time onwards, 95% of cars will pay at around £145 a year, and what he said is all of that money will go on roads. So some significant changes there that will only affect the purchase of new cars, it won't affect existing cars. Interesting news for business, some good news in a reduction in corporation tax, down to 19% and 18%. But what I think was something in the detail which needs a lot of looking at is the change of taxation on dividends, which I think will affect a number of business owners who operate as limited companies. A bit of clarity on the Allen investment allowance, which was due to go down to £25,000 in January. That will stay at £200,000 a year for the rest of the Parliament. And good news for smaller employers, a rise in the employer's allowance from £3,000 per employer to £2,000. In terms of health and education, extra money for health, and also an announcement that the student maintenance grants will go, and they'll be converted to loans, which will start being paid down for individuals when they start earning more than £21,000 a year. So some changes there. In terms of housing and transport, some interesting news for buy-to-let owners. If you've got a buy-to-let property, the amount of tax relief you'll get on the interest will be restricted to 20% instead of 40 or 45%, so a bit of a hit there for second property owners. Rent-a-room, one or two people take advantage of that. That's going to go up, that's being a bit more generous. But probably on the inheritance tax, some good news in that the inheritance tax threshold for a couple is now £1 million for those that own family homes. That's up from about £325,000 each, or £650,000 per couple. Defence, a bit of clarity there. We're going to stick to our 2% of GDP spending on defence, and the spending on defence will rise in every term of the next Parliament. Just to wrap up, really, a couple other things. The benefits cap was announced, which was pre-announced actually, that no household out of London will get more than £20,000 a year in benefits. And finally, some consultation on Sunday trading. That will be at the discretion of local councils and mayors. So, all in all, I think the Chancellor, did what he could, but there are inevitably winners and losers. Thank you.